If plan A doesn't work out, well, it's good to have plan B. If plan B doesn't work out, it's always nice to have alternatives.
You are Locked On Wolfpack, your daily podcast on the NC State Wolfpack, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Wolfpack Nation? It's time to get locked in with Locked On. Thanks for making Locked On Wolfpack your first listen each and every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcast and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Our Wednesday show is brought to you by TurboTax. Are you ready for stress-free taxes and the most money back guaranteed? If you are, head on over to TurboTax.com today and get matched with your expert. Happy Wednesday to all. As always, I'm Grayson Boone, joined by former Wolfpack defensive tackle Kenton Gibbs. Kenton, obviously, we are still in the middle of a head coaching search for NC State men's basketball. More than likely will remain in the middle of this for at least another week. Obviously, the top two coaches, Will Wade and Ryan Odom, are very much still in the middle of postseason basketball. We'll have to see how that plays out for the two of them. But I also have noticed a couple more names floating around, basically in the event that NC State is not able to grab option A or option B, Odom or Wade. So some of these names are not exactly unfamiliar for Wolfpack fans. In fact, all three of them have previous ties to NC State in some way, shape, or form. We'll start with the first name here. It's Justin Gainey. Justin Gainey is currently an assistant coach for the Tennessee Volunteers. Actually, he's the associate head coach, which in this instance with Rick Barnes kind of feels like head coach in waiting. At least that's the way it's been kind of presented across the internet. Justin Gainey's a former player for NC State. He played back under Herb Sendek back in the late 90s, early 2000s. And Gainey's been a part of one of the better basketball programs in the country, which is Tennessee here for the last couple of years. Kenton, what do you make of Justin Gainey's name being linked potentially to NC State?
The plus side of Gainey is you're looking at a Wolfpack alum. You're looking at somebody that everywhere he's been, there has been success at a very high clip, might I add. We're not talking about a guy that is like, oh, well, he's been all right, or no. Objectively speaking, the teams that he's been a part of coaching have been, nothing short of just balling. Okay. So by and large, that's what you have there. The downside is no head coaching experience, right? He's always been the assistant coach. He's always been the head coach in waiting. He's always been, like, oh, this is my right-hand man. This is the next in line, but the next in line is not the guy. It's not, you're responsible. When the buck stops, it ultimately stops at your door every time. He has not been that. So that's kind of your drawback there. But again, everywhere he's been, there has been some success there.
We've had a couple people ask us, not even just recently about Justin Gainey, but even as late as last year, when we thought we'd be potentially looking for another head coach before the magical run began. My hesitation with Gainey is basically exactly what Kenton just said. He's never been a head coach before. And that's not to say that he wouldn't succeed once he becomes one, or maybe later on down the road, whenever that does happen. I do think it's a matter of time for Gainey. But NC State, I just don't feel like they're in a position to basically take that risk on a guy that's never been a head coach before. And for Boo to come out and relieve Keatts of his duties, in my mind, if you're going to do that, you basically know who your top one, maybe top two selections are hoping to be. I don't think you're in a good enough spot where you can be confident in a guy that's never had the top role before. It's basically taking a risk on a project, and not to call him a project, but you get what I'm getting at here. You are trying to make an effort to go all in. Firing Keatts and then going after one of the top names here before the coaching carousel gets going, you're trying to be consistent. You're making a better effort, a bigger effort, a stronger effort to be a consistent name in the college basketball world. I don't think Justin Gainey is that name to get you there, at least not on paper and not immediately. I do think he'll probably end up being a good coach wherever that might be. My suspicion tells me that he probably will be the head coach in waiting in Tennessee, because Rick Barnes, he's getting up there in age, still having a whole lot of success, but I think it's only a matter of time before Gainey does become the head man in Knoxville. But that's my take on Gainey. I just don't think NC State can risk, rolling out a guy that's never been a head coach before, especially in this new world of NIL, which we reference a lot. Too big of a risk for me. Second name we'll move into, actually, the next two names are related. They are Archie and Sean Miller. I'll start with Archie. Archie's a former player for NC State. His name was floating around back in 2017 before we hired Keatts. He ended up going to Indiana, and my lasting impression for Archie, he kind of scoffed at NC State when his name was being brought up, and I've heard that it was he did not want to work for Debbie Yao at the time, kind of shuffled his feet, turned his nose up a little bit, took his talents to Bloomington, Indiana. Things didn't really work out for him in Indiana, obviously. He was relieved of his duties a couple years ago. He is now currently the head coach of Rhode Island, and he's not exactly blowing the doors down in Rhode Island either. So, Kenton, give me your thoughts on potentially Archie Miller returning to Raleigh.
Archie Miller is a guy that has seen success at a high level. The only problem is the success that he saw at a high level was mid-major. Dayton was his best hit. That's where you see that success. And then the other part of that equation is Dayton was not only his best time as a head coach, it was his first time as a head coach. So you talk about, hey, their first time as a head coach, you see the most success that you've seen. Well, what would that tell people? What do people then look at you and say? It's not easy to say, hey, this guy he was a really good coach at Dayton, and then he struggled at Indiana, and at Rhode Island, kind of meandering, kind of getting better, kind of getting there, but has not had a winning record once at Rhode Island. How do you tell people, hey, be excited about that? That's tough. That's a tough sell. So, again, you've seen a guy do more with less, winning consistently at Dayton, but the other part of that was your first stop as a head coach, and you have not replicated that success since.
Another characteristic of Archie as well is he does have a very fiery personality. We talked about that being a potential benefit with a guy like Will Wade yesterday. I do think it could also apply for Archie Miller. But with that being said, I think a lot of NC State fans kind of feel the same way that I do. I've seen a lot of it online. There's this unwell feeling that we have on Archie based on how he kind of, kicked us to the curb back in 2017, whatever the case may have been, chose to go elsewhere. This is another guy I don't really love trying to throw a bone here in this situation. When you're looking at getting the fan base ignited and inspiring hope, I don't think many people would believe in Archie Miller at this point of his career. And again, not to say that he can't find further success down the road. He's only 46 years old, so he's still a youngin'. But again, I don't think this is a big enough swing for NC State to be taking in a position like this one. If you're going to fire Keatts and you're going to conjure up all of this money, you're looking for a home run. Archie Miller would not be a home run in this instance. That leads us now directly into his brother, Sean Miller. Sean Miller is also a former assistant at NC State. He served us under the Herb Sendek years. He is now in his second stint with Xavier, with a 12-year stint with Arizona sandwiched in between the two. 2004, 2009, he was with Xavier. Then 2009 to 2021, Arizona. Now back at Xavier since 2022. Sean Miller's had a ton of success, and I know that's obviously his calling card. He's been to the Elite Eight 4 times. He's been to the Sweet 16 6 times. He's been to the NCAA tournament 12 times. So he is a mainstay when you're looking at March Madness. Obviously well-experienced. He's had experience with Team USA basketball. He tore up the Pac-12 RIP with Arizona, multiple-time winning Coach of the Year, multiple-time winning the regular season, multiple-time winning the conference championship. A ton of success at Arizona. Kenton, I'll give you my hang-up on Sean Miller. Sean Miller, for a long time, it was kind of whispered around, he was waiting to get the UNC job once Roy Williams moved on. And this is petty of me. I will admit that. Because of that, I don't want you. I don't want you here. Not to say he wouldn't do a good job. Again, very successful coach, but I've always kind of been rubbed the wrong way by Sean Miller. He seems always kind of whiny to me. If you've never seen him coach, maybe you have seen pictures of him coach because he's completely doused in sweat by halftime. We're talking full shirt, completely wet by halftime. He gets into it. Both Miller brothers are very high energy, but Sean Miller, I don't exactly think he would be a bad option. Hell of a coach and certainly has a resume to back himself up in doing so, but I don't know. I can't really talk myself into Sean Miller either.
First of all, I didn't even know the thing about he was waiting on the UNC. That's gross. That
was kind of underground, but yeah.
But even beyond that, the success is proven. He's proven that he can have success at a high level school. So there's that. He is the only one of these three that has proven. He's been the guy in a major conference, and he's won. He meets all three of those criteria. The other thing that I don't think Grayson mentioned, he has a fiery personality, but it's still not that showman or salesman. Like, he has a fiery personality that's not like the type where you're like, okay, I can get behind it. It's much more of a like, I'm going to whip your tail in line type of deal where it's like, oh, okay. And I'm not mad at that as a coaching style. In the new era of NIL, you need to have that. That feels like you need to kind of have that fundraising boosting ability. I mean, unless you have a GM that is just out of this world good at it, your head coach has to do it. And as of now, I don't know of any GM. And I'm not saying whether or not I know that he would be receptive to or would not be receptive to a GM. But if that is an unknown right there with Sean Miller, again, I could be wrong. Maybe he comes and everybody loves him. But another problem about Sean Miller is the problem that all three of these guys have in common. You're going to be behind the eight ball because you're always going to be compared to, well, we wanted Will Wade or we wanted Odom. We wanted one of those two, and it's you instead. So now you have to work from behind that eight ball to be that salesman, to be that showman. It's like, hey, everybody, come on into the greatest show, not just in Raleigh, but in the great state of North Carolina, not just in the great state, in the Southeast. Come on in. We're going to show you all a great old time in the Lenny. You know, he has to be able to do that. I'm not sure that he has a temperament for it. And I would say of these three, I don't think he would be the best of three at that.
That's actually a great point, and it leads us directly into our next segment. Coming up next, we're going to talk about potential buzz that could be brought forward into the fan base by any one of these three alternatives. This comes after a quick word from our sponsors.
Our first Wednesday sponsor is TurboTax. Taxes used to be waiting and wondering and worrying if you were ever going to get any money back, and then waiting, wondering, and worrying some more. Now, Taxes is matching with a TurboTax expert who can do your taxes as soon as today. An expert who gives your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return while you get real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on your own day. An expert who will find you every deduction possible, file every form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy. All so you can get the most money back guaranteed. No waiting, no wondering, and no worries. Now this is Taxes. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. Only available on TurboTax Live Full Service. Real-time updates only in iOS mobile app. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees.
Middle portion of our Wednesday show just gave you a little bit of a rough outline about the three alternatives being discussed for the head coaching position at NC State. That's Justin Gainey, Archie Miller, and Sean Miller. Now we're going to dive back into all three of them and discuss potential buzz that you could see being if they do get selected as the next head coach. So all three of these do come from the Herb Sendek tree, so they have plenty of NC State experience already built into this. We'll start with Justin Gainey, Kenton. In the event that Justin Gainey is selected as the next head coach, how big of a buzz do you think we'll see from the NC State fan base?
Well, before we get to Justin Gainey, I want to say this for all three of these guys. Rightfully or wrongfully, there would be deflation in Wolfpack Nation if it is one of these three. That's just a fact. That's just a fact. We know it. I know it. Y'all know it. So let's not lie to ourselves about that. Now, basically, I'm judging buzz by who would have the least deflation, who would have, an amount that is like, oh boy, people aren't going to start calling their car company saying, hey, that one pack, that charge to one pack NIL, go ahead and reverse that, please. With that being said, I think Justin Gainey is in such a interesting place because he has potentially the lowest floor, but potentially the highest ceiling of this group. And what do I mean by that? He's a complete unknown virtually as a head man. He's never done it. So there is a chance that he is to crash and burn spectacularly, which many fans will talk about. That'll be the thing. It'll be, you couldn't get Odom or Wade. You couldn't get either one. And then you'll see those problems in terms of him not succeeding. But you also could see a situation where this is a guy who has been here. He has played here. He knows the passion of Wolfpack Nation. He knows what it's like to play in the old barn, and he knows what what Wolfpack Nation is about. So there's a very high ceiling. There's a very low floor. And with that in mind, I think this would probably be, even with that being said, I think this would be the most disappointing of the hires because the Wolfpack Nation is just coming off very high highs and very low lows. That's not what people want anymore. They want stable highs, but if you can't give me that, at least give me stable middle of the pack, which again, there's a possibility that Gainey cannot even hold that potentially. So, that's why I'd say this is the one that I think fans would be most upset about.
I do agree that it would be the most deflating, just, falling back on that lack of experience as a head coach. However, I think because of the unknown and you don't quite know what you get out of him, I think you'd find easier ways to inspire some optimism. Again, he's coming from Tennessee. Tennessee's been one of the premier brands in college basketball these last couple of years. They're going to have another strong team into March Madness again this season. So he knows what it takes to succeed. He's succeeded under Rick Barnes here recently. Rick Barnes has been a phenomenal college basketball coach for decades on end. He has the pedigree, but the experience is just not quite there. And so I think when you tie that into talks about NIL, I don't really know how that would look, because if you're bringing in an inexperienced head coach and you're trying to ramp up the efforts and ensure that, you're going to be better than what you just gave the last guy, which is Keatts, and he had a lot to say about what the resources were this season, how does that kind of fall into place there? I think it's a very interesting conversation. I think you could convince yourself that he will succeed. Again, to Kenton's point, played here, knows what it's like to be a Wolfpacker. He is a Wolfpacker by trade, has a pretty decent understanding of the fan base here, and was an assistant here, so kind of doubled up in that way. But yeah, I agree with you, Kenton. I just don't know if the fan base would really give him a chance, being that we're already so bought into either Will Wade or Ryan Odom. So I think Justin Gainey would be a really tough sell. I think he's going to be successful whatever happens to him in his career, but I'm just not quite sold that it should be at NC State. Moving forward here into the Miller brothers, just like last one, we'll start with Archie here. If Archie Miller is the next head coach at NC State, what kind of buzz could he bring?
I think that he is closer to Gainey in terms of fan reaction than he is to Sean. I
would agree.
I think that people are going to look at him and say, he hasn't had a winning record in conference at Rhode Island. Why would I want him here? Don't get me wrong. He's had success. He started off well elsewhere, but I'm not exactly sure that this is the guy I want. And again, with what you told me about the North Carolina situation, that's really tough. That's going to be the biggest thing for Wolfpack Nation to get over, because from now to the end of eternity, we will hear those bozos in Chapel Hill. Oh, you got our leftovers. You got a guy that didn't want us, but we didn't want it. So I think that there would be some excitement in that he's been a head guy. He's been a head guy at a major school, a Power 4 school, but the lack of recent success would have people pretty down about that hire. So I'd say he's a second, but much closer to Gainey than to Sean Miller.
Yeah, I would certainly agree with that. And kind of to reiterate what I was saying a couple minutes ago, a lot of the fan base feels a little bit chapped by Archie Miller based on the way he kind of perceived us back in 2017 when that job was open again for him then. And I think, again, when you're tying this conversation into NIL and you're trying to get people bought in, that's like double duty, because you have to convince people to get bought into Archie Miller the second time around. And then on top of that, you'd have to buy into NIL and upping the resources for him. To Kenton's point there, the lack of recent success is pretty concerning to me. Not just at Indiana, but Rhode Island. If you can't succeed at Rhode Island, that's a pretty sizable jump coming back from Rhode Island up to NC State. And obviously he has coached at the P4 level before, but he got run out of Indiana as well. So it's not like he's been killing it at these recent stops. And for him to come back home and be the head man at NC State, it's a lot of pressure. We saw the way it didn't work out with Sidney Lowe. Hasn't really worked out that well with any former players, to be quite honest with you. So I'm not really sold on Archie Miller either. I think that double buzz situation and getting the fan base sold on him and then NIL, that'd be a really large hill to climb here in a short amount of time. Again, the transfer portal opens on March the 24th. That is just under 2 weeks. So not only does NC State have to have this decision pretty quickly, but the fan base is going to have to be in lockstep. The fan base is going to have to be agreeing with the head coach as best you can, because that's where the momentum will come from. If everyone unites on who we get here, that'll say a lot about how the rest of the spring and summer into the fall can go. And so I think Archie Miller is probably one of the bottom choices. Him and Gainey, I think it'd just be really hard to get the fan base totally bought into that one. Last but certainly not least, Sean Miller. Spent a lot of time in Arizona, 2 stints at Xavier, very successful. But Kenton, what are your thoughts about the buzz that Sean Miller could potentially have at NC State?
Again, I think of the guys not named Odom or Wade, this is the least deflating hire of the group. I think he's the one that, you would look at and say he's had success at a major school. He's done it. He's done it. Now, with that being said, again, there are the personality things where you're like, are you sure he's the guy to be the salesman, to do all the NIL and fundraising and all that? But again, that's something you could address with a great GM. But then it brings up the argument of, are you even sure that he would want a GM? And so it's one of those things that's kind of interesting in that regard. But I think that he is, of these three, the one that Wolfpack Nation would be most excited about.
I do agree. I think he has the best resume of the other two. Like I said, Sean Miller's had a ton of success. He's won a lot of trophies. He's been in March Madness and deep into March Madness more than just a couple times. I think the pedigree would match exactly kind of what we're looking for. But, I do agree with Kenton there. Can he be the guy that people kind of look past his past and agree that he can be the next guy to lead us to that next level? I don't know. Me personally, I'm not really that sold on Sean Miller. If he comes to NC State, would I accept him? Yeah, because the guy has had a lot of success. But I don't know. I think it would take some warming up for me personally to get Sean Miller here and really get the ball rolling. He's also had a couple instances of a little bit of a checkered past at Arizona, some infractions that he didn't exactly get penalized that heavily for. So he's been around the block. He's slid some money under some tables a time or two in a way that kind of connects to Will Wade. And a lot of people are out on Will Wade for that very same reason. But I don't know. Sean Miller's an interesting one. Of these three that I mentioned, Gainey and both Millers, Sean is probably the best option if you are considering an alternative. However, the search still very much remains on Will Wade and on Ryan Odom. That coaching carousel is really going to get kicked up here probably in a week to 2 weeks' time. It's imperative that NC State takes advantage of their timing and supplies the urgency in order to get this done. Coming up next, we're going to pivot just slightly and talk about if this coaching search for basketball has any impact on football trying to have a quieter spring. This comes after a quick word from our sponsors.
Our second Wednesday sponsor is Factor. Are you looking to optimize your nutrition for this new year? Factor makes eating well easy with chef-prepared, dietitian-approved meals that are fresh, never frozen, and ready to heat and eat within just 2 minutes. With 40 options across 8 dietary preferences each week, you can customize your meals to fit your lifestyle, whether it's calorie smart, protein plus, or even keto. Plus, Factor even offers wholesome smoothies, breakfasts, and grab-and-go snacks to keep you fueled all day long. The best part about Factor is they take the stress out of meal planning. You can try their Protein Plus meals packed with flavor and keeping you full all throughout the day. The convenience is unbeatable. No prep, no mess, and great food in just minutes. Eat smart with Factor. Get started at factormeals.com/LockedOnCollege50off and use code LockedOnCollege50off to get 50% off your first box plus free shipping. That's a lot, so I'm going to read it again. That is code LockedOnCollege50off. LockedOnCollege50off. LockedOnCollege50off at factormeals.com/LockedOnCollege50off. Again, that was a lot. Bear with me. To get 50% off plus free shipping on your first box, only at Factor Meals.
Last couple minutes of our Wednesday show. I thought this was an interesting nugget to talk about here, Kenton. Obviously, the men's basketball team is in the middle of a search. Haven't had to do that in 8 years' time. Coach Dorn and the football team decided to have a very quiet spring. They closed all their spring practices to media. They're not having a televised spring game in an effort to, keep everything in-house. You have 2 new coordinators to try and get everybody up to speed. Do you think that the media attention on the basketball coaching search will have any impact on football trying to be quieter this spring?
Well, I think it definitely makes it easier for football to fly under the radar. However, in football, we have a thing called sudden change. And what sudden change means is there's a turnover. okay? Because you weren't normally, the way that football works, you know that you're about to transition. A special team of some sort comes onto the field, and you know, like, oh, we're kicking the ball off, or oh, we're about to punt the ball. This is what's happening. But there's a sudden change. Sudden change could either be good or bad. Sudden change could be good. I was a defender, so normally sudden change was bad for us. But sudden change if you're on offense, very good thing. What do I mean by that? I think Doran is in kind of that same space. This sudden change can be good or bad for you. This can mean, hey, it's clear the university is committed to winning. They're committed to winning. They're committed to putting the resources into winning. You're going to have the resources to compete for some of these guys that, every time the best players in North Carolina never stay in North Carolina, you're going to have the opportunity to compete and go get those guys. And that's no disrespect to the players on the roster. By that, I mean in terms of the recruiting boards, which we know it's more of an art than a science. They're wrong all the time. But I'm saying in terms of the highest rated guys in the state of North Carolina, very often they are not staying in state. So you have one side of the coin, the resources will be there because you're making a massive buyout to get rid of Keatts. That's just the reality. You're eating a big buyout to get rid of him. Now, the other side of that, the negative side of that, if you're Doran, they're ready to make a change. And you just saw one of Debbie Yao's old hires get gotten up out of here. You too are a Debbie Yao hire, brother. If you don't get up on your horse and make something good happen, that seat gonna get a little bit warmer. Gonna get a little, the grease gonna start to, if you throw some water in that thing, it might pop. If you know what I mean. That seat is gonna heat up really quickly if you don't get done what needs to be done here.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting conversation. I remember a year ago, people were asking, well, if this newfound basketball success is happening and baseball is doing well, women's basketball is doing well, does that have any added pressure on the football team to succeed last fall? Well, not only did it not add any pressure, it didn't work. We went 6-6 and fell very short of expectations. If Coach Doran and the football team are trying to be quieter this year and just focus on themselves, a coaching search probably won't have that much impact on it because, again, if you're staying in-house, you're not worried about the outside noise anyway. But to Kenton's point there, I do think this warms Doran's seat up just a little bit because if you are looking at Boo Corrigan and making this decision now, Keatts is coming off of winning an ACC title. Doran has not done that. Keatts is coming out of a Final Four run. Doran has never made it, that deep into a postseason either. This does show that NC State is trying to turn heel and pivot and be more consistent in athletic success. If Coach Doran and this football team fall short again this year, we're talking, 6-6 or worse, I think it's not out of the question that you see changes happen on the football side as well. We kind of poked at that at the very end of last football season as well, but I do think this is a very real thing. The athletic program, and especially hiring the new chancellor here, which I assume will be announced here in the next probably couple weeks or maybe a month's time, that will be the single most important decision made for the next 10 to 20 years in NC State athletics. If the new chancellor comes in and has a vision for increasing athletic competitiveness and revenue and NIL efforts, pursuing literally everything it takes to get to higher levels of success across the board, that can change everything. And I think that's why it kind of ties back into basketball, why it's so important to get this hire correct. Because if it goes really well, it kind of eases the process into everything else being ramped up as well. And that includes football. So I do think that this will warm up Doran's seat as he gets into the spring quietly, but into the summer. And then once the fall time rolls around, we need success and we need it now. If NC State wants to break loose of the chains of mediocrity, it's got to happen everywhere. And that includes football, who's coming off of a very mediocre season. So it's a lot to digest. It's a lot to talk about. But everything for NC State, it feels like a metamorphosis of sorts. We feel a little bit like a butterfly. That's kind of a soft reference, but you get what I'm saying here. We are under construction. A new era of NC State is upon us. And I don't think that's dramatic at all. I think it's very real. I think the Keatts era not only ended, but a bigger era for NC State also ended on Sunday. The administration is getting ready to prepare themselves for more aggression in the college landscape. NC State, I do believe, is coming. And if they nail this hire in basketball, whatever else happens with football down the line, we have our suspicions. If you get that right too, NC State could find themselves in prime position for many years to come in the future. That will do it for us here on Wednesday. As always, thank you all so much for joining us. Be sure to hit that like button, drop your comments in the comment box. Tell us what you think about Justin Gainey, Archie Miller, or potentially Sean Miller filling in the next head coaching vacancy. If it comes to that, we'll see how this plays out. Any other names you'd like to float out there as well? I've seen Ben McCollum from Drake a couple times. Great coach, but I just don't see NC State getting involved there. Again, any other comments you have, get those in the box. Mash the subscribe button if you have not already. We'll see you right back here tomorrow on Thursday for more. And until then, go Pack.
Go Pack.